Welcome to this lesson on using percentages. Today we're going to use this parrot family to help us understand percentages. They're kind of ridiculous, but let's just roll with it. Alright, so what we're going to do is we're going to start off with Brother Pat, who has friends who have blue feathers, and 10% of his friends have blue feathers, and he has 300 friends. So we want to know how many have blue feathers. Guess I can't highlight in yellow on a yellow page. So how many have blue feathers and how many do not have blue feathers? So what we're going to look at here is we're going to look at using our tape diagram from before and what this means. So you have to remember that 10% isn't a number. 10% is an idea and representation of a number. So 10% means 10 per 100. But we have 300 friends. So you have to remember that you have 0% and that is equal to 0. So now 0% goes all the way to 100%, and that's your whole. And we know that the whole is his 300 friends, because that's how many friends he has total. Then we have the other piece that we know, which is 10%. And we want to know, this is 10%, what is that number equal to? What is 10% equal to? Well, we know that we can take and count by tens to get to 100. And if I do that, I'm going to have 10 boxes, because 10 divided by 10, or 100 divided by 10 is 10. And then I know that I can take 300 and divide it by 10 easily, so I can use that number. So here I have 20% and 30%. And I'm actually just going to start writing every other one because I'm running out of space. So 10, 20, 30, 40, 50, 60, 70, 80, and then 90. So now I have 10 boxes, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, and I'm going to take that 300 and divide it by 10 and know that each box there are 30 birds. So every 10% is worth 30. Okay, so I know that if 10% have blue feathers, so have is equal to 30, and then don't have blue feathers would be equal to whatever 300 minus 30 would be, which is 270 birds. But we don't want to do this all the time, but this is what I'm having you remember. You're looking at this saying that, okay, 10% is equal to a different type of number. 10% is representing this 30. It's giving you a better visual of how many birds it is out of the 300. All right, so we're going to move on. And if we look at that and draw it, we know that 10 per 100, so here's 100, and we're just going to color in 10, and then 20, and then 30, because it's 10 per 100, so you know that it's 30 birds have blue feathers and 270 don't. Okay. So now what we're going to look at is we're going to look at how do you do this without doing the visual. You still need to be able to represent it visually and what's going on, but we want to know how do you do this without doing the visual. So we have to look at the words. So we have 45% of Mama Patty's hats are blue. If she has 20 hats, how many are blue and how many are not blue? So again, the important question here, how many are blue and how many are not blue? It's important to know that we're working with 45%. And that we're working with 20. Right, so let's look at what this means. So here, I'm looking at, 45% of the 20 hats. So if I look at this 45% of 20, well, I know 45% can't be used as a percentage because it's not a number. So I know that I have to change it to being out of 100. So I can either write it as a fraction or I can write it as a decimal. So if I write it as a decimal, I'm going to use multiplication. If I write it as a fraction, I'm going to use a proportion. And I shouldn't even say a fraction. I can either write it as a decimal and multiply, or I can write it as a ratio and use a proportion. Of means to multiply, and then 20 is how many hats we have. Okay, so we're going to look at, I'm actually going to skip ahead real quick, and I want you to think about this. So as a rate, or as a ratio, I can even say, we know that there are 45 per 100. Okay, and I know that I can turn this into the value, and I can say that, okay, well, 45 over 100 of the 20 hats is equal to what we're looking for. So remember we talked about this as being the value of the ratio, or we can even, and this is actually a rate as well, and you can use it to multiply to find your missing information. So I know that my ratio is 45 to 100, and I can multiply that by the 20 because that's what I'm looking for, and then that'll give me the information that I'm missing. And we'll go back and look more specifically at how I know to put the 20 here. All right, so going back and looking at this, when I multiply, I know that I can take the percent as a decimal. So in this case, it would be 0 and 45 hundredths times the number you have, and that's going to be the numerical value of the percentage. Now, yes, you need to write this down, but the other thing that I want you to write above this, the number that you have, it's your whole. So you're looking for 45% of your whole, and that's equal to the part. So it's always your percent times your whole equals your part. Okay, look at it this way. Your percent is something out of 100, so it's a part out of a whole 100 is equal to the part over the whole. So that's your proportion. Your percent over 100, and your percent, again, is your part. So if we're looking at labels for it, it's part and whole over part and whole. All right, so when you look at how we work this out, you're going to find that as a percentage or as a proportion, when we work it out, it ends up kind of looking like our multiplication problem, except for when we divide by 100, that happens at the end. Whereas when we do it in an equation, remember to turn your percent into a decimal, essentially you take 45 and divide it by 100, which tells you to move your decimal twice to the left and gives you 45 hundredths. Okay, again, we'll touch base about this later, but what I want you to notice is that when you're working with a percent, so 45 per 100, this is your part because 45 is part of the whole group of 100. And when you set it up as a proportion, remember your labels have to be the same. So in this case, it's your part of your group over your whole of your group. Okay, don't get caught up on the fact that this is birds and hats and whatever. Just focus on part and whole. All right, so then, and actually let's finish this off and figure out how many of those hats are, there we go, blue and not blue. So we're going to do this both as a proportion and as an equation so you can look at what I'm talking about. So as an equation, we change it to a percent as a decimal, and we multiply it by our whole. Now this is where we're looking at this and saying, okay, this is a whole, and this is a percent. Doing that within your problem is very helpful. So 45 hundredths times 20 is going to give me my part. In this case, my part is equal to the number of blue hats because 45% of the hats are blue. So 45% of her 20 hats are blue, which is our part. Okay, so you can even look at this and say that's the part, blue hats. Okay, so if you go through and you multiply this, and we can do it using a calculator to go a little bit faster, 45 hundredths times 20 equals 9. So I know 9 hats are blue. And then I know 20 minus 9 is 11, so 11 hats are not blue. Okay, so again, I want you to remember that we took 45% and multiplied it by 100, or I'm sorry, not 45%, and we didn't multiply. We took 45, which was our percentage, and divided by 100 to get the 45 hundredths. When you do a proportion, again, it's your part of your percent over the whole of your percent, which is 45 per 100, is equal to the part, which is your blue hats, over the whole, which is all of your 20 hats. So part, whole, whole. Now when you solve this, you do 45 times 20, which is kind of what we did over here, and then that's equal to 100 times x. And then we know that we do this and we get 900 is equal to 100x, and you divide both sides by 100, and you get 9, which is exactly what we got over here. Well, if you look at this, before we do 45 times 20, I'm not a space here, so before we do 45 times 20, what if we moved over, so 45 times 20 equals 100 times x. What if we divided both sides by 100 right away? Okay, so if we did that right away, 45 times 20 divided by 100 equals x. Okay, so you end up getting, well, one of two things happens here. You either get 45 times 20 hundredths because you're doing the 20 divided by 100, or you can look at it and say, oh, well, that's what I did up here to the 45, and I got 45 hundredths times 20 equals x, which is exactly the same as my equation. So your proportion will lead you to the same answer because your proportion is essentially you getting the same equation. Okay. All right, so the next thing that we're going to look at is just lining up our pieces. So here you have what percent of 2,000 is 204. So again, this is my whole, this is my part, and I'm looking for the percent. So my percent would be x, my whole would be 100, I would put 204 over 2,000 if it were a proportion. Now, if I were doing it as an equation, my part, well actually my total would be 2,000. And actually you can cross that off and put whole because that might make more sense. Your percent as a decimal is x, and your part is 204. And I want you to look at this as well. To solve this, I would have to divide both sides by 2,000. So you'd have x, your percentage, is equal to 204 divided by 2,000. Well, think about it. When you take a test and I give you a score and I say that you get a, let's say 19 out of 22, don't you take the top and divide it by the bottom? And then that gives you your answer, but then you have to take your answer and turn it from a decimal back to a percent. So really, if you're comfortable with it, when you know that you have the part and the whole, you can jump to, I have to do 204 divided by 2,000, or I have to do part divided by whole. Otherwise, keep sticking with this, and that practice will come more naturally. Okay, but right now we're really focusing on where do our pieces go, because I know you guys are really good at solving proportions and equations. So focusing on where do those pieces go. Okay, again, I want you to go ahead and try this one on your own if you feel like you're ready. If not, work through it with me again. So here we have 55% is 20% of what number? So 55 is 20%. Well, let's make this easy. This is obviously the percentage, and 55 is 20% of what number? Well, 55 is your part because you know when it says of what number, so after the of is going to be your whole. So you're looking for your whole, and this is your part. So here you have 20 over 100 is equal to 55 over x. And then again, here you have x times 20 hundredths is equal to 55. All right, this one I do want you to pause and try on your own, and then when you come back, we'll check your answers. Okay, so here, this is obviously your percent, which should be the easiest, and this is your whole, so you're looking for your part. So it's 75 over 100 is equal to x over 150, or as an equation, it's 150 times 75 hundredths is equal to x. All right, so what you're going to do here is you have 3 problems that you need to try. I know we went over a lot and there was a lot of explanation. We're going to keep working through those explanation parts together, but what you really need to be able to do before you come to class is I want you to be able to identify the whole, the part, and the percent, and then write them as an equation and a proportion, and then solve. Okay, so again, it tells you that you're going to solve the first one using an equation, so solve using the equation. I gave you space for work over here. The second one you're solving using a proportion, and the third one is your choice. As always, if you have any questions, be sure to email me or write them down so we can go over them in class.